This past winter I booked a week in a remote cabin because I told myself I needed to disappear. I wanted a place where the only interruptions were the crackle of a fire and the slow fall of snow, no calls, no city hum, no people. The listing said cozy, private, off-grid, and I imagined mornings with steam rising off coffee and evenings where the world narrowed to the circle of light from a lamp. I packed little, a bag of clothes, a notebook, some canned food, and a cheap flashlight. The drive out was white and quiet, the highway thinning until it was a single line cut through trees. When I arrived, the sky was a flat pewter. The cabin looked smaller than the photos, wood darkened by weather, its porch rimed in a thin crust of snow. There was no welcome note, no caretaker. It was exactly the kind of quiet I thought I wanted. The owner had left a jar of fire starter sticks and a stamped set of keys inside a little box by the door. I laughed at myself for being nervous, locked the door, and fed the fireplace until the room softened into a warm orange glow. I made coffee and sat with the mug cupped in my hands until the light in the window looked like an animal's eye. The first night I slept heavy. I woke sometime in the deep hours to the soft whisper of something outside. For a second the sound didn't land, it could have been wind or a small animal. I told myself stories of owls and put my head back down. In the morning the porch was marked with prints. Not messy paw marks but the tread of boots, long and deliberate, heading from the edge of the property to the porch and back again. I told myself it was the owner checking things, a neighbor on an errand. The rational explanations stacked like crates. Still, the tracks lodged in my chest like a stone. I scanned the trees, the line where the road vanished into white. Nothing was there. The rest of the day I tried to move normally, stacking logs, pacing with a dog-eared paperback, answering no one. But I felt watched in small ways, the impression of eyes in the glimmer of a window, curtains twitching when nothing moved outside, the hair on my arms lifting as if someone had whispered along my skin. On the second night the sound returned, a slow crunch in the snow. I did not go to bed right away. I sat with a lamp on and the light made a small warm planet. The house had its own small music, the pop of the fire, a radiator's tick, then outside, another softer rhythm layered over everything, a footstep, then another. I chose not to check the door at first out of a stubbornness I didn't understand. I told myself I would later, I would wait until daylight, until help could be called if I needed it. In the void before dawn I woke again. There it was, the soft scraping of steps close to the porch, then silence. I lay, feeling the cabin's heartbeat through the floor. Bravery felt like a foolish cloak, so I dressed and padded barefoot to the door, pulling back the curtain to peer through the peephole. Nothing. The snow looked untouched, honest and white. But when I opened the door, the prints resumed at the threshold as if someone had stepped lightly in just then and disappeared into the trees. People might have turned the paper in their hands and shown it to the police, but I was private and stubborn. I kept it in my pocket like a splinter that could be ignored. That day crawled. I found myself watching the windows and counting minutes, cataloguing the creak of a branch, measuring peculiarities as if inventorying the house would make the world solid. I checked the locks 3 times and again for a 4th time, a machine operating on panic. The house became a place that listened, and I realized I had stopped thinking like an owner and begun to think like something being observed. That night the noise came earlier. A soft tapping at the back wall near the fireplace, then a drag like the slow pull of something across wood. I told myself it was the house settling. I clung to the rational answer like a life preserver. The tapping returned in a pattern, 2 short knocks, a pause, 3 light scrapes, a pause, a single heavy thud, an uneven rhythm that felt deliberately communicative. When I moved through the hallway my hands found the wall for steadiness. The little house was full of shadows that slid and pooled, every dark corner a ledger of possibility. I checked every room. Nothing. Then I went to the back wall and pressed my palm against a hairline crack. It echoed back a hollowness that felt almost like a throat. I slept badly and dreamed of slow steps and a face blurred at the edge of a window. Early the next morning the prints were fresh, closer to the porch. The pattern was wrong. The person did not walk and leave. They circled the house, drawing paths that made shapes I couldn't name, a geometry of obsession. I thought of leaving, but leaving felt like conceding something I couldn't yet understand. I drove to a diner 3 hours away for human noise and coffee that burned. When the sun slipped low, I returned because staying felt like refusing to be erased. That night the sound was inside the house. At first I thought the pipes, then the tapping was in the hall beside my door, 3 light taps, pause, 2 quick scrapes. Something slid beneath the bedroom door as if the building itself had been fitted with a small, patient mouth. The bedroom had a tiny balcony, the kind that looks decorative on a drawing, a door with a deadbolt I'd locked when I arrived. In the steam of the shower I heard a faint thud and the whisper of movement. I held my breath until it hurt, dried quickly and crept to the door with the flashlight like a narrow spear. Through the glass, at the very edge of the porch, a figure moved in a way that made memory want to soften around it. The face was wrong, too pale, the eyes too blank, the mouth a thin seam like a wound pressed closed. Something small and folded dropped on the mat and slid, as if pushed by breath. The scrap of paper lay at my feet when I opened the door. "Watch," it said in the same tight handwriting that had been on the porch before. The paper felt like a coal in my hand. I called the police. The dispatcher was calm and functional. "We'll send someone by," she said. "Can you wait somewhere safe?" My safe places felt imaginary. I sat on the floor of my bedroom and pressed my back into the door until my shoulders ached. They came quickly. A young officer with a puffy jacket moved through the house politely, like a man holding a fragile object. He took a report and photographed prints and tucked my note into an evidence bag. He didn't search with the thoroughness of a movie hero. There was no cinematic sweep, only the efficient bureaucracy of someone who writes statements and moves on. He offered the neighbor's number, a promise that someone would check the area. In the hour after he left, the house grew small and predatory. I made a list in a notebook: times, sounds, the slant of footprints. The notes felt childish, like tally marks for something too big to handle. Sound patterns returned like a message I could not read at once. The house had become a vocabulary I was attempting to learn: the long sigh of the front door when it breathed, the way the stairs complained, the soft shush of snow moving outside. On the 3rd night the progression felt confident, no longer tentative. Shadows moved at windows, not in the random way of branches but with intent, as if someone had learned the anatomy of the rooms and walked it again and again. The balcony deadbolt was found unlocked, which made the hair on my arms stand up like cat fur. I thought of the crib that had been in the town's rental listing, an old, cracked child's bed someone had abandoned in another renter's memory. That image prickled like a bruise. While I slept in a defensive half-awake state, a scrap unfurled under my door. The handwriting this time was jagged, the sentences staccato: "You missed it." Signed D.N. The initials had become a brand, a deliberate mark. The rest of the night was a fog of sirens and uniforms. The second police visit felt heavier, more thorough, K9 units walking the line of trees with careful noses, flashlights cutting cones through cold air. They found a trail that ended abruptly, a narrow trench where the underbrush had been disturbed, then stopped as if something had been lifted and carried out of the world. The officers were professional but human. They had their speculative tones: maybe someone moved through, maybe someone carried things. They took statements, asked about histories I didn't have, about previous renters who had noticed strange things. The owner arrived the next day like a man half expecting a bill. He told me, with a tone that sounded like old grief, of past notes and noises, of a neighbor years back who swore they'd seen a dark shape in the trees. The detective said quietly that sometimes people don't take these things seriously until it's too late. He meant something I didn't yet want to let into the shape of the days, that patterns are a kind of language, and when someone writes themselves into the margins of your life, you become their book. I left the rental. I couldn't stay in a place where my body had been rehearsed by someone else. I stayed in town with a friend who had a large dog and a louder life. Days folded themselves into meetings with detectives and restless sleep. The police followed up irregularly. They called when tips came, they took prints, they sent someone to check in, each visit stitching a small administrative bandage on the open sense of being watched. Months drifted like snow melting away and then frost returning in a new pattern. Then, months later, something small cracked open the cautious optimism I had tried to build. A forgotten photograph posted to a community board, someone's snapshot of the diner where I'd eaten lunch the day I almost left, gave me a tiny, impossible thing. In the reflection of a window, behind a vase, there was a shadowed face. It was grainy, almost meaningless, but when I magnified it there was a familiarity so specific it made my throat work. The tilt of a head, the set of a jaw, the way a person carries themselves when they are used to being unseen. I tried to place it on a bus, in a grocery line, at a wedding, but the memory slid when I reached for it. I tried to live normally. I moved apartments, changed roads to work, installed deadbolts and a security system. The letters stopped for a long, careful stretch. I told myself the matter had been contained, filed under unknowns and given the kind of bureaucratic closure you can file away in your head so you can keep living. Then one cold evening, nearly 9 months after the cabin, a scrap lay on my welcome mat. A small stone held it down. "I'm still watching," it said. The initials, slashed like the same branding I'd seen before, were at the bottom, DN. It's the small things that break you down. Not a face, not a scream, but the knowledge that someone crossed from a geometry in the snow into the architecture of your days. From then on I lived with habits that fattened like barnacles, checking locks twice, turning lights on at odd hours, walking with my phone like a talisman. I told myself the police were doing what they could. I told myself there were explanations. I rehearsed 1,000 small routines that made me feel less like a target and more like a person with armor. There were nights I would wake in a sweat convinced I heard dragging and crying and that childish high pitch of fabric shifting. Sometimes it was a bad dream, sometimes it was the world figuring out how to remind you it had changed. I thought of the crib in that rental, an empty, rotting thing that seemed to breathe, and of leaves moving like slow hands. Once, when I crept to a window and peered into the backyard, I thought I saw a figure stand at the edge of the trees and then recede like someone drawing a line and erasing it immediately. The detective's last words to me had been careful. "We have patterns," he said, "but not the person." He meant evidence without identity, threads without a loom. The media asked for a quote the first time the case leaked into the local paper. I told them I was fine and meant it because of how words tighten your life. People were kind in small spikes, a neighbor checking in, a coworker calling, a friend who brought casseroles and stayed too long. Kindness is practical. Fear is heavy. I learned the small architecture of being observed, how doors creak in a way that betrays tampering, how a porch light eclipses footsteps in the snow, how to listen for the wrongness in a house. I learned the vocabulary the night the letter changed from a note to a map. I learned how little it takes to make you move differently through the world, a shift in the way you cross a road, a glance into the passenger seat of a car you pass, a habit of parking with your back toward open streets. I learned not because I wanted to but because someone made me learn. Sometimes at night I press my palm to the glass of my window and feel for warmth that's not mine. Sometimes I imagine the shape of the path that visitor took, how precisely he circled the cabin, how deliberately he returned, and I see it as something almost ritual. Steps like punctuation, returns like commas. I do not know whether DN is initials or a shorthand used to sign off on a private joke. I do not know where he came from or whether he lives in a town 3 miles away or behind a desk in the city. What I know is the geometry of his attention. It can be traced across months, across years, across the small decisions that keep me alive. When the nights are worst I replay the porch, the way the scrap of paper landed at my feet like a seed, the word watch folded like an omen, the basket of evidence that never coalesced into a hand to put around my throat. I think of the 2 frames of grainy video where a figure flickers and disappears, like an afterimage someone tries to hide. I think of the child's sweater shredded in the snow at the cabin, a remnant of something reduced to suggestion. I think of police notebooks and missed chances and of the quiet human pity in the detective's face when he looked at me and said, "Sometimes people are patient and dangerous," as if that were a consolation. I moved cities again after the scrap on my mat. I changed my name on a few accounts and tried to make my life less legible. It helped a little and not at all. The letters stopped appearing in public places for a while, then small things would arrive, a note tucked into a cereal box in a grocery bag once, a single pebble on the passenger seat after a night out. Each time I felt the old geometry map itself on my skin and I would freeze, learning again how to be economical with my presence. There is a knowledge that changes the way you occupy space. It teaches you every door's weakness and how a house listens. It teaches you the small ways to move so you are less visible, like an animal learning the wind. I have learned them all. I have learned how to watch back. It is a slow, tired vigilance. I do not live loudly because loudness leaks. I do not shower without glancing at the door. When I sleep, my phone is in my hand like a nervous animal, and I leave a light on in the hall. The last footprints remain a map under my skin. They are not only from that cold porch. They are in the way I plan my drives and in the way I measure time. At dinner parties, I watch the faces in patterns, checking whether someone looks like a background shadow I once glimpsed. I carry my life like a suitcase with a flat side, always ready to be put into a space and pulled out. The world goes on, people go to work, seasons turn, but the knowledge of being observed has changed me. It has taught me where to stand and how to make myself small. If there is a conclusion, it is not neat. There is a police file that is thick with reports and thin on answers. There are moments of ordinary laughter and stale boxes of canned food at my new apartment. There are nights when I think I have learned to live with the vigilance, and then a single scrap of paper on a mat reminds me otherwise. The last thing I expected from that cabin was this slow education, that a person can be reduced to prints in snow and a cramped handwriting, and that sometimes those small signs are not warnings but exercises in possession. The only conclusion I did not, that once the forms were signed the danger would be catalogued and contained.